Hey guys, it's Belle, and in this video we are going to be reading through and translating a really cute, interesting little poem from, I believe, 15th century or maybe 16th century Iceland, and it's called the Skaufhalabálkur, which is the tale of the drag tales, the saga of the drag tales. Now, this is actually a hapax legomenon, maybe not hapax legomenon, but it's attested in a single place, a single manuscript in the Orla Magnusson Institute collection. And you can access this with the link that's in the slides, which will be provided in the description of this video. And it's quite interesting in a lot of ways. So it tells the story of a den of foxes whose patriarch goes out on his last final glorious hunt where he's mortally wounded and trying to bring food for his family. But there's a lot of really interesting things about it. The first and most important one is the actual meter. Now, unfortunately, I've, in order to save space, put it out into paragraphs here, so you can't actually see the verse structure, but I can tell you that this is written in what's called Fornyrðislag structure, which is the meter of Eddic poetry and ancient poetry, which by this time in medieval Iceland was not a very common meter for composition. So it's a rather deliberately anachronistic callback to earlier styles of poetry, even though the subject matter is actually quite light-hearted. And as we'll see in the final video in this series that I'm going to be doing, reading through this poem, actually it was just written by some random dude for fun, he says. So that's quite interesting. Now, some scholars also claim that this is drawing from the Raymond the Fox mythos. Now, Raymond the Fox, to use Jackson Crawford's terminology of medieval cinematic universes, right? We have a bunch of different characters and such that might overlap and interact with others. You've got the Ostrogothic mythos, you've got the Roman mythos, you've got the Arthurian mythos, etc., etc. Raymond the Fox was one of these, and it's kind of like the Winnie the Pooh of the Middle Ages, one of the furry cinematic universes, let's say. And Raymond the Fox, goes out and has all sorts of adventures. I actually haven't read too much of that genre because it's a bit later than my period, but some scholars claim that this is part of it. I'm kind of skeptical, although I don't know too much about it, but simply because none of them are called Raymond. Maybe some of these foxes are mentioned in the text of the Raymond mythos, but I find it skeptical, and also because it's not really in that style. It's not like chivalric literature. It's more it's in the style of epic poetry, really. But that's a different topic. So without further ado, let's get into this. So I'm going to divide this up, by the way, into 5 different videos going through 8 stanzas each. So the first 8 here, then stanzas 9 to 16, then stanzas 17 to 24, 25 to 32, and 33 to 42. So, as usual, if you want to pause the video and have a go at translating this with the gloss on your own before I get into it, feel free to do so. As for pronunciation, I'm going to be reading this out in restored Old Norse pronunciation, similar to what Jackson Crawford uses, and you can go to his channel for a video on how to pronounce that properly. He's much more of an expert than I, but if I slip up here and there, that will be the influence of my native English or some other language. So forgive me if my diction is not perfect, and also forgive me that it's not going to sound like the most beautiful poetry. I'm not massively used to reading Old Norse aloud, so that being said, let's read this. So, Hefur I grenjum gammal Skaufhali lengi búið hjólang hollu. Ót hafa þá, segir ráðsuptalda Ótjan sonu og eina dóttur. Því voru 99 Skaufhala, hundsjafninga, heldar en 20. Þar að sanna þess fyrða formali að oft verður orðum eins vant í tók. Þó voru burtu born Skaufhala, flest olfarin útfóður garði. Þó voru eftir þeim til fylgðar 3 yrmlingar og þeirra dóttir. Malti gorð hann í viðgrenn lagju. Hvað skulum vinna verð til þarfa? Við erum orðin veiklinduð mjög. Reiksnáð harðlag hallar að naðir. Okay, what does all of this mean? So, hefur grenjum gammal Skaufhali lengi búið hjá langhollu. So, the old Dragtail. Now, this is something that I'm actually not sure about in the whole of this poem, which is what the actual fox's name is, because he's called the old Dragtail here, but then his children are called the 19 rather, little Dragtails, and there's various bits at other parts in the poem which might be a name for him, but they could also be descriptions. That's part of the problem, actually, is that a lot of these things which look like names could actually even just be poetic kennings for a fox, which we'll see down below. And dragtail, which is what the etymological breakdown of Skaufhalabálkur is, could well be one of them. I mean, of course, we're not dealing with like literal actual foxes, right? This is a story for children, so I get it. But anyway, so the old dragtail has lived for a long time in his lairs, Hyo Langholu, by the side of Langholu, which is Longtail. Presumably that's his wife. Åt hafa þá ser alls upptalda 18 sonu och eina dotter. So they have owned for themselves, this is quite an interestingly idiomatic phrase, alls upptalda, all counted up, all reckoned up, 18 sons and 1 daughter. Því voru 19 Skaufhala. So therefore there were 19 little or descendants of the dragtails, hundsjavninga, the equivalent of dogs, hellre than 20, rather than 20. So this is drawing emphasis to the fact that he has 19 children rather than 20. Farsanna this firda formali. In this, the ancient saying of the ancients is proven. Al ofte verder orgum einsvant I tog. So that for the, and this is literally that Norse word argr, which is quite famous because it can mean wicked, evil, cowardly, even sort of effeminate. And yeah, so it's got some sort of diminutive aspects to it as well. So for wicked people, there often becomes a want, literally want, a longing, a lacking. Eins of 1, etog in 10, which is so there's a lot of really fascinating numerology that we could think about it. And I mean, we can think about it, we can speculate on this poem. Frankly, it's probably just, we wouldn't be able to get an answer, right? It's attested in one manuscript. We don't know, the guy who writes it is named, but we don't know much else about him. We could look at other things in the manuscript, but if I remember looking at it, I don't think there's particularly that much to do with numbers in there. So, okay, there's 2 significant numbers here, which I'm finding very, very interesting. The first one is, of course, the number 19. Or rather, this is from the previous sentence, but it's making a reference, this sentence, from Dara to Itog to the number 19. Now, the number 19 is, of course, significant because it's the lunar cycle, and the number 19 is sort of the most important one, the focal point of medieval astronomers and computists, because they needed to track the lunar cycle to calculate an appropriate date for Easter. And therefore, there could be some kind of associations with the moon and the night and such like this. But here in this sentence, the number 9 is actually very interesting as well, because much more so than medieval Christian texts, the number 9 seems to have a lot of significance in Norse texts. And a quick thing to put on the end of this as well, which is really fascinating to me, is that this poem is actually very secular, despite being composed very late and not even harkening back to some kind of older Norse mythos. It's not like Norse mythology, this poem. It's just a poem about foxes in a den, perhaps drawing from the Raymond mythos, which is a sort of high medieval, later medieval cinematic mythos that came about. But the number 9 seems to have had a lot of significance for pre-Christian Norse texts. So if you look at, for instance, the Sigtuna Plate 1, which is a runic inscription that makes frequent reference to the number 9. Have 9 needs is a line that comes up in that poem. I believe there's 9 herbs charm in Old English. Odin hung from Yggdrasil for 9 nights. So there's lots of significance attached to number 9, which we don't really get in Christian sources. Birchfeth of Ramsey talks about 9 nails piercing Christ, although that's not really, that seems to be a Christian mythological thing. And I can say, somebody who does medieval astronomy for my PhD, it's the number 9 isn't drastically significant. He also, Birchfeth of Ramsey in his Enchiridion also says the number 9 is significant because 9 is divisible by 3, basically. And I'm just dying with that. I'm like, dude, you pulled the Bob's Burgers line, the literal joke from Bob's Burgers, and Birchfeth of Ramsey is writing his book on medieval astronomy in early medieval England, being like, ah, yes, genius. This is why the number 9 is significant. But anyway, all of that is a preface to say the number 9 seems to have significance for pagans. The number 19 has significance for Christians. So it's interesting that they've sort of made a reference to both of them here, because they've got 19 descendants, these drag tails, but this line maybe almost works to undo that, right? Because we might be associating them with science and astronomy and the lunar cycle, which helps humans to understand the date of Easter. But actually, no. This is a sign of their wickedness, because they had a perfect set of 10, and then they would have had another 10. But the fact that they don't have another one is proof that they're like a wicked brood of people, because for wicked people, there will always be a lacking of 1 out of 10. So I think there's some really interesting numerology going on in these two sentences here. But anyway, I rambled on for a long time there. Let's go on to the next lines. Þó voru born Skaufhala flest all farin ut foddergarði. So at that time, the children of the Dragtails had almost all gone out of their father's enclosure, which is kind of, it's a sweet little, he's got a little empty nest, bless, or almost empty nest. Þó voru eftir þeim til fylgda 3 ermingla og þeirra dóttir. So then there were 3 little wormlings, which is weird. I mean, obviously they're not literal worms, right? Because they're foxes. Unless Yrmr here is sort of being used similar to the Old English worm, with a sense of like dragon or worm or serpent, and the implication is not to indicate a literal dragon of some kind or a literal worm of some kind, but more like just a bad creature. And the serpent, because of the biblical account, is taken as just the sort of stand-in creature for any evil, wicked being. So that could be what's going on here for these like little worms, little dragons, or maybe it's quite literally worm, as in like little worms, and you're meant to have this mental image of a foxhole in the ground, and you've got the old dragtail who goes out to get food, and you've got his little worms, 3 little worms that are left in the hole, like they're sort of stuck in the soil, and also their daughter. And so then, Malti Gordhani with Grenlagju. So literally, well, actually, I'm going to do a whole video on the meaning of this bit Gor, because I'm actually presenting a paper at an academic conference about this word in Old Norse and Old English literature. I think it means something a bit different to what scholars generally think it means. So drama, academic drama there. But I'm gonna sort of say here as a teaser that I would translate this as rotting flesh tooth. And this is clearly a sort of kenning for, well, either a kenning or a name for a fox, and perhaps even the distinction isn't too relevant, right? Because foxes, by virtue of being scavengers, they may be more likely to have rotting flesh in their teeth. So this is, and I'm also not sure who Gortani is. I'm not sure if Gortani is the old Dragtail himself. And also I'm not even sure who Grenlagyu is. Because from the implication of what this person says below, Gortani seems to be demanding that Grenlagyu go out and get food. And given that it's the old scout Dragtail who goes out to get food, and this is a masculine person, we can assume that this is that this would be the person going out to get the food. But Grenlagyu is a feminine noun, pretty sure. It means like lair, liar, like somebody who lies in the lair, implying a sort of domesticity. So it's a bit confusing because I don't necessarily know who it is really, because in the next line we have lair liar responding, saying that Gortani should go out more. So it's a weird one. Gortani seems to be complaining to his wife that they have a lack of food. And maybe then Gortani is the one himself. And then the wife responds saying, you should go out and get your food. So that's what I'll say it is for now. I'll say that Gortani is the old Dragtail himself. And that's our protagonist of this story, is Gortani, or Rotting Flesh Tooth. And he speaks to Lair Liar, his wife. What skulum vina vartil farva? Which means, like, what should we win for our needs? Which food, basically, should we win for our needs as sustenance? Við erum orðin veiklinduð mjög. We have become very impaired, weak-minded. Hrygsnáð, we have become barebacked. Og hallar rotnadir, and our tails have become broken. So in these first four stanzas, we've told that Gorthani has he's been living for a long time with Langholu, which now I'm wondering if, well, it is confusing. I don't know whether Langholu and Grenlagyu are the same person, but one of these two is Gorthani's wife. Or baby mother, however you want to put it. And then they've had 19 children because they are evil people, and that is why they couldn't have 20, because number magic. Most of their children have gone. The only ones that are left are 3 little worms. Oh, and quickly think, the number 3 is also actually significant to the pagan mythos. In the Sigtuna play that I referenced earlier, the number 3 is also mentioned as one of the magical numbers. I believe it's, the number 3 is just repeated multiple times on that runic inscription. And then they have one daughter that's left. So maybe the daughter is just like not counting here. So the number 3 is significant because that's the number of sons. The daughter is just an add-on and she's forgotten about. Which I feel bad for her if that's the case, if that's what the author intended here. Although given medieval attitudes towards girls, it would not surprise me. And so Slaughtertooth is complaining to his wife that they are like old and weak and they don't have any food in their lair. Sad face. So I'll read those stanzas 5 to 8 now. And as usual, feel free to translate this afterwards. Svarar Grenlagja gommel og móti. Nú þú burtu born okkar þöskin, en þó ung sem eftir sitja, og en ekki óleg komin. Lítil missir í mínum ungum, atvinnu brestur okkur bæði. Hafðir þú óður hatti út vegur, nagtir voru þó og nogar vistir. Sannast må það sinnist, þú gammal og stilfattur, að strjúka heiman og matfalla meira tafla. Niðjum okkar til náþurftar. Þú munt heiman halda verða og afla bróða tilbús okkars. Varði það skorða í venju að leggja, sem virðum må verðstu gegna. Okay, so what does this mean? Svarar Grenlagja gommul og móti. So the old lair liar responds, Nú þú burtu born okkar þöskin, en þá ung sem eftir sitja. So our children, our grown-up children, Ruskin, have gone away, and thou ung sem efter thitja, and the young ones are left, they're still sitting here. Og en ekki oleg komin. They have not yet come onto their leg, basically, so they can't run for themselves, they can't hunt for themselves. Lítil missir í mínum ungum. There is little food for my young ones. At vinnu brestur okkur bæði. So the at vinnu is sort of lack of food, basically, and it breaks both of us. Or sustenance is lacking for both of us. And brestur here is one of those nouns, I don't know the linguistic term for it, but you translate it as it is. So literally, it is lacking atvinnu in sustenance, okkur bæði, for both of us. Or it's breaking both of us even. Hafðir þú óður hatti út vegur. So if you had the going out with excursions for a custom, nagtir vorðu þó og nógar vistir. There would be sufficiencies, there would be bounties and sufficient victuals, let's say, for Vistia. So Grenlager is saying to her husband, you know, we don't have enough food. If you weren't so lazy, we would have meat right now. Sannast må það að sinnist þú gammal og styrðfattur að strjúka heiman. So it can be proven that you are old and sort of stiff-backed. Too old and stiff-backed is the implication here, in order to go from your home and get us some food. So avla is a weird verb that means to get or acquire, and it takes a genitive. So you're too old and stiff-backed to go out and obtain food for me. I do like that as well. I like how Grenlager is like, there's no food, there's nothing here for my kids. Go out and get me some food. She's great. And there's, to be fair, she also says, for the needs of our children, of our young ones. She doesn't say for him. You know, she's like, get yourself something. She's just like, I want food, and I want food for the babies. And then she carries on her rant. Þú munt heiman halda verða. So you must at home, you should instead rather halda, you should sort of, this literally means become far away from home, but it means you should be far away from home, and obtain meats for our need, for our appetite. Verri þar skora í venju. So it would be worse for a custom at leggja sem byrðum og verðstu genga, to lie down, because that way, more verðstu, it may worst of all go gegna virðum for the men, which is kind of a weird one. I think what this might be is it might be a kind of moral metaphor which is being communicated by this poem. So virðum here is the poetic word for, well, I'm translating it as men here, but it really means people. So Grenleggja could be saying, it will be worse if you don't go out and get food, because that's bad for like the people who are in this foxhole. Or it could actually be, it would be bad, just like it would be bad for the humans who are out there whose livestock you're going to steal, if they were to lie down all the time and not do anything. So yeah, she's yelling at her husband, get off your backside and go do something. Stop dragging your tail, or rather start dragging your tail out of the hole, because I want food, and I want food for the children. And so, yes, that is Skaufhalabálkur, stanzas 1 to 8. In the next video, we will go through stanzas 9 until 16. And, okay, yeah, so the usual, like, comment, subscribe, please. Thank you so much to my 4 lovely patrons who make more of these videos possible. One of the benefits of being one of my patrons on Patreon, and I'll link my Patreon in the description of this video, is that you can get tuition from me in medieval languages at lower than market rates. Now, the only medieval languages that I'm offering right now really are going to be Old English, Latin, and Gothic, and well, Middle English as well. At some point in the future, I might feel comfortable enough offering Norse and potentially Greek, but that would be in a year or two's time. But for now, English, Latin, Gothic, and Middle English, I'm very happy to teach you. And it's much lower than market rates. At the £15 tier is when you get tuition. And given that the average hourly rate for Latin tutors is £50, I think that's a pretty good bargain. You can also join my Discord server, which will similarly be linked in the description. It's a great server, and I often post my glosses of text as images before I turn them into videos, so you'll get early access to them there. And we're also a fun community of like-minded people. We're trying to get back into doing movie nights because I haven't done one in a good long while. But we just share memes and we chat, all the rest of this. It's a good time. You should come and join us. And until next time, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have a nice day. Bye, everyone.